Hi, this video is a continuation of a former video, but you can see this first. In my last video, I looked at how to create, drop, alter tables and databases. I also tried some of the problems that you can run into, which will protect you from accidentally doing something. For example, you need to remove constraints and stuff like that. So we looked a bit into that, and also how to auto-increment by using identity in Microsoft SQL Server. So in this video, I'll focus on how to create mock data and also how to use the data manipulation language, mainly select, delete, insert, update your CRUD functionality, create, read, update, and delete. So this is what we'll be focusing on. Then lastly, we'll look into some simple joins just to see what we can do with that. Okay. So dive in deep. So first off, I opened up my favorite mock data site, which is free to use as long as you're not working with serious amounts of data. So this webpage, you can generate your own data, whatever you need. And there's a lot of stuff in here. So first off, we see there's something here like we have an ID, first name, last name, email, gender, and IP address. And this is pretty fine. So when you have different fields here, you can remove some of them. I can add something else here. So I could add another field here and call it something else. Let's just call it A for now. So in here, I can choose which data type I want, and this will actually also generate data of that type. So it's kind of both. So what we could do, for example, we could take, so there's no address for the person. So if I click location, we can see we have city, country, blah, blah, lots of stuff here. So postal codes or whatever we want. We could also have some personal information like avatars, like image URLs. We could have buzzwords, catchphrase. So let's put the catchphrase. That sounds fun. So I'll just call this phrase. So now we have a lot of stuff here. By default, it generates it in comma separated format, which is pretty nice. This can go into different systems, but in this case, we want to work with Microsoft SQL Server and SQL queries or SQL queries. So it's not the best format here, but just to view the data, this is what it looks like. ID, first name, last name, so forth, and this is what it really looks like. This is the data we will get. And by default, this is only showing 100, but the max amount for this free is 1000 rows, which will be fine in our case. So I think let's change the format. I'll show you something cool. You can do a lot of stuff here, and you can even get a web API. You just need to sign in order to do that. But in this case, we'll use the SQL. We'll try preview again, and we can see we actually get some code here, some SQL code that we can use. And we can see that it says insert into mock data, okay? So maybe our table shouldn't be called mock data. Maybe we want to call it something like persons. And we can also include create table, which is pretty cool because now if we look in here, it will create the table of persons first with everything inside of it and set the different types and so forth. So this is pretty cool. So I think let's just make it created as well and do everything for us. And it also, if you look in here, yeah, so that's good. So let's just try to do that. So I'll click download data and it downloads into a SQL file. If I open that up, I can choose like which app I would want. And I probably should use my SQL Azure SQL Management Studio or whatever it's called, Data Studio, Azure Data Studio. So I can just say open file and I can open up my persons here, which is pretty cool. So I should select the database first. So maybe I need a database for this. So I'll create a new database, but I need to do that in a new window. So I'll create like here, new query, and I will select the master database. First connect, and then select the master database, and I'll say create table mock demo, like that. And we'll do like this, and click run. Create table mock demo. Incorrect syntax. Okay, so let's just see. Near end. Oh yeah, of course I need to also specify that it's not a table. I'm sorry, I wanted to create a database. I was a bit confused, sorry. Okay, so now I created a new database called mock demo. And I needed to do that because then I can select I need to connect first, sorry. I then need to change into my mock demo database here. Because now, yeah. So I want to create persons here. So I'm going to change this a bit. For example, the first name 50, I think that's too little. And here as well, I'll make it a bit greater. Gender 50 should be enough. IP address, fine. Phrase, let's make that. I think that should be maybe a lot bigger. And I would like to use the N varchar instead, so that we can use UTF-16 Unicode. And also I want to make this the primary key. So I'm going to say primary key. And I also put identity here so that it will auto increment. Let's see. Syntax near. So I'm not sure why it does that. Let's try to, now it invalid object name. Okay. Let's try to run it for a second. Wow. Cannot insert. Okay. So it actually worked. It created a table persons. Let me explain for a second. So let me just refresh here and let's open up mock demo and see it actually created persons. Let's select top 1000 from that and see that it's empty. And I'll say why. So the reason why it's empty because I did actually create it fine. The problem is that the query itself, let's just look at, here it is. The query itself, I'm inserting IDs into each person, and that won't work because the person ID is auto incrementing, so that won't work. So let's go in here and remove the ID, and then I'm just going to not include that and then download it again. So this will of course be some new persons, but that doesn't really matter. And then we'll go back into Data Studio, open up the file, the new persons file, and it's on the mock demo. So now there's no ID. So if I run this, it should add 1000 into, you see, one row affected, and so forth. So it just added 1000 elements into our code now. And that's because if we try to specify ID when it's auto incrementing, of course it won't work. So that was my mistake here. So I don't know why it doesn't, it says incorrect syntax. It shouldn't, because this is actually how you do it. So let's keep it like that. I'm not sure. So let's go back into, I did a query over here, top 1000. Let's run, and we can actually see all of the data in here. Looks really cool. Like now we actually have a lot of rows to work with. So this is a cool way of creating a lot of mock data. So let's try to do some work on this data now then. So I'm getting too many of these, so I'm just going to remove them all because it's getting too confusing with all of these. So if you want to check them out, you can look at my other videos. Just remove this one, and remove. So now we're here. Persons, this one as well. And we already inserted them, so off we go. And this was one on the master. I'll remove that. Now we're back to square with nothing here. Okay. So on this mock demo here, I'm going to create a new query. And now we're going to look into the different query types here. So that was about mock data. So now that we have a lot of mock data, let's try to look at it. So first, let's just try to see some data. So the command for fetching data is called select. So we type select, and then we need to say which columns here. Columns. So for example, column 1, column 2, etc. And then we need to say from, and then we need to say which table it's from. So in this case, it's persons, right? Of course, there's nothing called column 1 and 2 on persons, but we know we have something called ID, and we also had something called first name. So ID and first name, if I say I want to select ID and first name from persons, you should be aware this is the column names. So it means that if you have all of the data inside of this, it will select only the column of ID, only the color of first name, and all rows. There's nothing here to restrict this from selecting all rows. So by default, it actually selects all rows. So let's run that. So we get all rows, all 1000 rows in here. We can do something. We can say select top, something like this, and then take like the first 10, and then it will only select the first 10 rows. This is one way that we can limit the amount of rows. The other thing we can do, which is probably more interesting, is that we can limit the rows based on something. For example, we can set up something that we're searching for. So for example, now we see only ID and first name. So let's just select all the columns. We can type all the name of the columns. We can go into, like we can look here on tables and persons and then columns. And now we can actually go and type all of these. There's a shortcut for that, which is just like asterisk like that. And if we click run, then we get everything in here. So let's say that we want to limit the amount of rows in some other way. Now we've shown how we can limit the amount of columns. So how can we limit the amount of rows? So if I want to say, okay, let's get all, I only want the males in here. So then we can use something called a where clause. So we can say, select everything, all the columns from persons where something is true. So what I'm saying is I want to say that gender needs to be equal to, and then I put the data inside of these, and then I write male, and I run it again, and now I only get the male genders. And you probably guessed that it's just as easy getting the female. You just type female and that's it. So this is a pretty cool way. We could also say, for example, we want the first name to be Tina, like this, Tina. Click run, and there's only one person called Tina. And if we look at it, it could be multiple persons with that name. I don't know. There is only one though. So that's it. We can also look at last names. We can look at email addresses. So this is basically how select works. So we can select columns and we can select rows that we want. So by default, the biggest one is just writing select everything from persons. This will select all columns, all rows. But oftentimes we don't want everything. We only fetch the data we actually need so that we don't get too much data. So this is how we can fetch data, and there's also more to this. I will show that later. So the next thing we can do is, let's try to make a new query. So I'll just go for a mock demo, new query, and let's try to look at delete. So delete is probably the easiest thing to do. So let's say I want to delete all people named Esther. For example, this first one here is Esther. So then the syntax is a bit different. So we say delete from, and then we type the name of the table. If we run this code here, we will delete everything from persons. So this is dangerous because we are not limiting the amount of rows that we are deleting. We are only limiting which table we are deleting. So if I run this, it deletes everything in here. So I can actually show this. So if I just click run, let's just see. Okay. So delete from persons. So let's try it again. Run. Okay, so now I deleted it. I don't know what happened before. This should be just working out of the box. Okay. So it actually removed 1000 rows, you see. So be very careful with this, not limiting the amount of rows. So if we look into our database now, run the same piece of code, everything is gone. It's a horror. So that wasn't very good. So what we can just do, we're that lucky, we actually saved everything into a file from here. So I just run this. It adds 1000 rows, and I go back and yay, now it's all there. But you do see that the IDs have incremented, so it never reuses the old IDs for a reason, because this can lead to problems. If you deleted someone, they had an old ID or something, so you always want new IDs when you add something back in. Okay, so so that's basically it for select and delete. So I just want to show with delete as well. So just like you can use the where clause here, you can also use it. Let's see, Tina. There's no Tina here. Okay, we'll use Esther instead. So right now we have someone called Esther here. Just so we can say where delete from persons where first name is equal to Esther, right? So, I use the single quotes here. This is the correct way, like that. So I'm going to delete from persons where the first name is Esther, and I click run. And it actually deleted 2 rows. So there was 2 people called Esther, apparently. So this is also why you have IDs on databases if it's a specific person. She's still here because I haven't rerun the select statement. So let's fetch the data. Okay. Try again. So it's probably if you select something and click in, it will run the selected. That's probably also why it failed before. But now we can see here, Esther is gone. Fortunately or unfortunately, but that was what we said we wanted to do. We could also remove something. We could remove everyone with a specific IP address or phrase or whatever they have here. But oftentimes you would want to remove a specific person. Let's say the person is no longer your customer or something. This guy here called Hunt Jeritka or whatever the name is, has ID of 2012. So oftentimes you would say where ID is 2012, and you would go run, and here Hunt is right now. So I'll click run, and 2012 is gone. So this is how you delete from your data. And select. So the next thing is to insert data, and this is also pretty straightforward. So when you want to insert data, it's important that the data is true to the structure of your columns and the constraints that are on the columns. So if you have foreign key constraints or in this case primary key constraints, we have one where we're using this as identity, meaning we cannot insert something with the ID. So let's just go in here and see, this is how we are inserting the persons. So it says insert into. This is the keywords for inserting something. We always have to ask this into, and then persons, and then parentheses, and when we say the first column we want to add something to, and the ID was deleted here because if we specify the ID, we are going against the constraint that we made that this is identity, meaning that it will auto increment. So we cannot set the ID ourselves. The database will do that. So we set the first name, the last name, the email, the gender, the IP address, and the phrase. And we can, in this case, because we didn't set that anything shouldn't be null when we created the database, we didn't set anything couldn't be null. So we can actually also insert something into a person where everything is null. So let me show you something like that. So I'll just go here, make a new query, and I'll say insert into persons, and let's just say only put in the full name, and we say values, and then we should put in the full name. I'll just write me like this, and if we look into, let's see here, it's the same, like it's called first name. This is why it's, and then let's go back here, first name like that. And I'm not specifying anything else. If I insert that, it works fine. So I didn't specify all the other columns because they will just be set to null. So if we go down here all the way to the bottom, I don't know if we can select that. Or is it in the top? Oh, I need to reselect everything. So we go for the last one. You can see here in the button, this is me, the person I created. No last name, no email, no gender, no IP address, and no phrase. So you have to think about when creating these, if you want to put constraints there, for example, that it cannot be null. And we can use the alter table to do that if you want to add it afterwards. I've shown that previously. Okay. So this is basically how you insert something. This is not very dangerous. You can't insert a lot of data or delete something or something like that. You'll just get an error if it doesn't fit the table you're trying to insert into. So this is pretty straightforward. So then in some cases, for example, I inserted this person. In some cases, you figure out, oh, I forgot a lot of stuff in here. So I want to change that person. So for that, we need to use the update command. So when using the update command, you have to write something like update, and then you have to write the table name. So I only have persons in this table. Update persons, and then you use the keyword set to say what you want to set. For example, you could say like last name. I want to set that equal to Misan, and sorry, and I have to use single quotes. I'm not used to this, so I'll just. So I opt-in person said last name to Misan. If I do this, and in here, because now you're changing data, you have to be careful. If I do this, it will set the last name Misan to everyone in the database. So all the last names will be overwritten. So we have to use, we have to use a where clause with this. Otherwise, it will be problematic, because we don't want everyone to be called Meeson for last name, and it's hard to roll back on that. So let's go back into look at our data. So let's say it was the last one I created called me. So you shouldn't look at so we could say something like where first name is equal to me. That would work, because probably there's only one person in the database called me. But it's not very good practice to do that. We should, of course, use the ID for this, because the ID is there as the primary key because we know it's unique. So always go for unique when you want to update something in the database. So we don't want to do something. For example, before I removed Esther, and there were two people called Esther in the database. So that was problematic. So let's try to do that and see if we can set the last name Meeson. And one row affected, it says. I need to rerun the query in here. Go to the bottom of this. And we can see now it has data in here. So we could do the same for email address, gender, IP address, and so forth. Maybe let's try to do that just for email and gender. So I want to show you that we can, of course, do more than one. So let's set the email to me at meson.io or something like that. And we also want to set something else. We just use the comma notation, and then gender. We set that to male. And instead of using the first name, we're going to use the ID equals to 3001, if I can do that. And of course, single quotes all the way like this. So we're saying set the email and gender to this, where the ID is 3001. I'll click run. And I did some error here. Let's see. Email, gender, maybe try again. So be careful where you put the cursor here. Have to put it in the beginning, or it will only do the rest. Okay, so we go back and we run this again, and we go to the bottom, and we can see we updated both the email address and the gender at the same time. So you don't need to do it one at a time. You can do multiple like that. Yeah, so that was it for the update part. Okay, so for the last part, we're going to look into how we can combine data from different tables. And I'm going to do that in a separate video, because this subject is better on its own. And I also want to explain something in regards to why we want to do that and why we want to set up the constraints. So that's it for now for this video. So we looked at manipulating the data inside of the database, And inside of tables, we use select for fetching it, delete for removing it, insert for inserting, and update for changing data that was already there. And for the last video, I'll look at joins. Thank you for watching. Bye.